The moment the Skyline G700 jet opened its cabin door, a single sentence sliced through the air like a cold blade. I'm not comfortable with him sitting up front. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, it was just a whisper from Richard Hale. Yet it dropped into the luxurious cabin like an alarm siren, stopping everything for a single suspended breath. 2 rows away, Andre Coleman, the black man in a smooth grey suit, opening his laptop, had no idea that this quiet breath of contempt would trigger a chain of events powerful enough to bury careers, even an entire financial empire. The California sky outside the window was still a perfect blue, but inside the cabin, the atmosphere was shifting toward a storm. Andre had chosen seat 1A not out of ego, but because he needed a quiet space to prepare for the biggest deal of his life, the acquisition of Swiss Robotech. Today he was flying alone, a silent and efficient business trip, exactly his style. 42 years old, wealthy, calm, and private, he carried the energy of someone who understood deeply that real power doesn't need to be displayed. But that quiet was disrupted softly, yet venomously, by Richard's whispered remark. Melissa Carter, the chief flight attendant, heard it, and a flicker of unease crossed her eyes. She was familiar with long-time VIP clients like Richard, wealthy, sensitive, easily offended. But when her gaze landed on Andre, that hesitation hardened into a cold calculation. Andre didn't look up yet. He felt the sharp breeze aimed at him, the familiar sting like an old scar being pressed. Richard stepped into the cabin with the entitled air of someone used to claiming space. His expensive golf shirt still held the scent of cologne, his silver hair perfectly combed back, and the sound of his shoes on the floor felt like a verdict. He glanced at Andre, frowned slightly, then immediately pulled Melissa close, lowering his voice. I don't want to sit behind him. That word him was tossed into the air like scissors, cutting through every layer of politeness. Andre didn't move, but his chest tightened, not from surprise, but from familiarity. That invisible feeling of being denied a place, of being treated like an intrusion, had never fully left him, even now, as one of the 50 most powerful leaders in America. A part of him wanted to stand up. Another part, stronger, told him to wait. Observe, remember. Melissa adjusted her smile and walked toward Andre. Her voice was gentle, but every word carried caution. Mr. Coleman, we have a small change. Mr. Hale is a long-time guest and he gets a little anxious when flying. Would you be willing to move to seat 4? Andre looked directly at her. His voice was low, and even yet sharp as a knife's edge. I booked this seat. And I need the space to work. Melissa gave a strained smile, clinging to her last thread of hope. It's just a small favor. It will help the flight run smoothly. Behind her, Richard pretended to read a magazine, but the curve at the corner of his lips gave him away. Andre recognized that look, the look of someone very used to everything bending to his will. Andre inhaled. He once believed moments like this were remnants of the past, from school days or early tech meetings, when people assumed he was an assistant instead of the founder. But no, it was still here, in first class, on a flight he had paid for, with a flight attendant trying to convince him to surrender the seat that belonged to him. He smiled, but it was a tired smile. I'm not moving. That answer thickened the air instantly. Melissa was not used to refusal. She bit her lip, turned sharply, and marched toward the cockpit. The door cracked open, and Andre heard fragments, uncooperative, then creating tension, then seat 1A. Moments later, Captain Howard Briggs appeared, his steps heavy, his face tight, his eyes openly impatient. "Mr. Coleman," he said, his voice deep and edged with judgment for the sake of the flight, "I'm requesting you move to seat 4A. Andre set his laptop down. "I booked and paid for 1A. "Can you give me an official reason for the change?" Captain Briggs crossed his arms. "You are making another passenger uncomfortable." Richard pretended not to hear, but his eyes twitched, pleased. Andre felt his heart clench again. Uncomfortable. Because his skin was darker, because he sat in the front, because some people believed they were born for the best seats. Captain Briggs leaned closer, his voice cold. "If you do not follow crew instructions, I will have to ask you to leave the aircraft." The words hit Andre like a hammer. He met the captain's gaze and saw the familiar arrogance of someone used to standing above others, used to giving orders, used to never being challenged. And Richard nearby was covering a smile, certain he had won a game Andre never agreed to play. In one painful moment, Andre considered his choices. If he reacted, they would call him aggressive. If he stayed silent, he would allow himself to be diminished. But if he waited for the right moment, Andre picked up his laptop and rose to his feet. Every movement was slow, deliberate, as if carving the scene into memory. He walked past Richard, who smiled triumphantly, and sat down in seat 4A. His heart pounded, not from defeat, but from a thought taking shape. A thought cold as steel. A plan. No one realized that the moment he lowered himself into seat 4A was the moment everything changed. They thought they had taught him a lesson, but only Andre Coleman understood what had truly happened. They had no idea who they had just provoked. And the storm, the real storm, had only just begun to form in his mind. Andre Coleman sat in seat 4A back, straight eyes, fixed on the back of the seat in front of him, as if staring into an invisible surface, while inside his mind, hundreds of thoughts were spiraling into a cold, precise whirlpool. Outside the window, the Van Nuys runway began sliding backward as the Skyline G700 powered up for takeoff. But inside him, another world was unfolding, fueled not by jet engines, but by years of compressed humiliation, layered from meetings where people assumed he was an assistant to signing sessions, where they asked if he was sure he was really the chief executive officer. Every cut was now aligning, forming a blade, and he knew it was time to use it. Melissa was pouring wine for Richard in seat 1A, her smile following every rule of training, a slight bow, gentle eyes, a voice sweet enough to coat the air. But only minutes earlier, those lips had hardened, and that same voice had become a sharp tool, trying to push him out of the seat he had paid for. Richard lifted his glass, tilting it towards seat 4A, with a smug, taunting smile. Andre glanced at him, but did not react, not from hurt, but because he was busy analyzing the system that allowed this to happen. He opened his tablet and activated the satellite connection. The internet was slow, but enough. The encrypted message he sent contained only 4 words: "Daniel, initiate the file." Less than 30 seconds later, the screen lit up. Daniel Cho, Chief Financial Officer of Coleman Dynamics and his loyal partner for 12 years, replied, "Are you certain this will happen today?" Andre typed a single word, "Confirm." 1 word with the weight of a sentence. For 6 months, Daniel and the analytics team had been reviewing Skyline executive jets as a potential acquisition target. Weak finances, high debt, poor management, a heavily tiered internal culture, especially troubling reports of discriminatory service toward black business travelers, all compiled by artificial intelligence into a golden opportunity. Andre had planned to wait until after his Zurich trip to review it, but now there was no reason to delay. contract uploaded to the secure portal Daniel messaged. Andre opened the document. The numbers danced across the screen, but he didn't need to think. He knew every debt line, every asset, every transfer clause by heart. And with a simple stroke of his digital pen, Skyline executive jets became his. The entire transaction was so silent that Melissa had no idea that only a few steps away, the man she had helped push to the back had just become the owner of the entire company. Captain Briggs didn't know. Co-pilot Evan didn't know. Richard certainly didn't know. All three still believed they were in control, but the power trajectory had changed long before. Andre opened the second folder crew file for flight Romeo Tango Sierra 117. He reviewed each page, evaluations, complaints, disciplinary history. Melissa had previous complaints for clear favoritism. Briggs had been accused of handling situations based on personal judgment. Evan was quiet, compliant, unwilling to challenge his superior. None of them had committed an offense serious enough for immediate termination. But today's mistake, the one they had just committed against their new owner, was the final point he needed to conclude not aligned with Coleman Air Service culture. Outside the window, the G700 accelerated. Andre's body leaned back slightly as the aircraft lifted. In that moment, when gravity pressed him into the seat, he felt it. Clearly, this was not the sensation of takeoff. This was the sensation of a battle beginning. The seatbelt chime sounded. The cabin returned to its usual chorus, the hum of compressors, the clink of crystal glasses, Richard bragging to Melissa about a deal he once forced an opponent to surrender. Andre quietly opened his prepared email to the current chief executive officer of Skyline. Effective 9:00 a.m. Los Angeles time, Skyline executive jets will transfer ownership to Coleman Dynamics. All management-level personnel must surrender company laptops and access badges. The crew of Flight Romeo Tango, Sierra 117 will receive separate instructions. At the bottom, he added a new line, initiate internal investigation into service standards and discriminatory behavior. He hit send. A small notification appeared, email delivered. No sound. No one in the cabin knew they had just become his employees. No one knew their futures had already veered sharply off course. Richard was still raising his glass, telling victory stories. Melissa was still nodding and smiling on cue. Briggs and Evan in the cockpit still believed they were guiding at this flight. But Andre knew the only truth that mattered, real power, never needs to be shown. It only needs to be used at the right moment. He closed his eyes and took a long breath. In the darkness behind his eyelids, he saw every moment he had been underestimated, dismissed, pushed out of places he had earned. That pain had never weakened him. It had made him sharper. And this time, he would not rise only for himself. He would rise to change an entire system. The aircraft shimmered slightly as it reached cruising altitude. Up front, Richard said loudly, "See, Melissa, everything works out when handled properly." Andre opened his eyes. No anger, no trembling. Only a strange stillness, the kind that appears right before a massive storm. He looked forward. The confrontation would come, sooner or later. And when it did, he would stand up from seat 4, and not as a passenger, but as the true owner of the sky they thought they had pushed him out of. The storm was coming. But this time, he was the storm. The Skyline G700 slipped into a smooth stream of air at 41,000 feet, the cabin bathed in a soft, golden glow that looked peaceful, but that peace was nothing more than a thin curtain hiding the storm building inside Andre Coleman. Up front, Chief Flight Attendant Melissa was still busy catering to Richard Hale, as if he were the ruler of the entire sky, pouring wine. Bending, slightly smiling with that rehearsed, half-flattering expression, completely unaware that, with a single signature on a tablet, her future had already been sealed. In seat 4, Andre sat as still as stone, but every sense in him was razor-sharp. He heard the way Melissa changed her tone when greeting Richard, heard the boastful confidence in Richard's laughter after his first glass of champagne, heard the cockpit door crack open, just enough for Captain Briggs's low, rumbling voice to escape. "We need to depart on time. Don't let that passenger cause more trouble." That passenger was him, an internationally renowned Chief Executive Officer, creator of an artificial intelligence system used across the world, reduced in their words to 2 syllables tossed aside like trash. Andre opened the file on his tablet, where Daniel had sent him documents on the crew financial operations and internal culture of Skyline. Every line was a puzzle piece, revealing the true face of the company he had just acquired. Skyline had once been the premier jet service for the West Coast elite, but in the past 5 years, complaint rates had risen, finances had weakened, and most concerning of all, reports of discriminatory treatment between different groups of clients had increased significantly. Andre read on unsurprised because the very situation he had just endured was living proof. Meanwhile, ahead of him, Richard leaned back and spoke loudly enough for the rows behind him to hear. "Some people don't understand their place. Melissa, you did the right thing. Everyone needs to know the boundaries." Melissa replied softly. "Yes, Mr. Hale. We always try to maintain the highest service quality." Service quality, 2 words that, in that moment, became the cruelest kind of irony. Andre didn't need to turn his head to sense the mocking glances from a few passengers. He had lived that feeling too many times entering boardrooms where people mistook him for the water service staff, attending tech conferences, where people asked him, "Which startup are you representing?" only to freeze when he walked on stage as the keynote speaker. He always overcame those moments, not with shouting, but with strategy. Tonight would be no different. A soft ding sounded through the cabin. "We will begin beverage service shortly." Melissa pushed the service cart down the aisle. When she passed row 3, her eyes flicked briefly toward seat 4A. It was just a glance, but it carried pure disdain. Andre saw it. She believed he had lost. She believed his silence meant surrender. She believed that defending a familiar VIP like Richard would help her earn better pay, better recognition, better opportunities. She had no idea that the moment she looked down on him, she erased her own future. Andre opened a new message from Daniel. Only one line appeared. "We now control the entire personnel and operations system." "Do you want to send warnings now?" Andre replied. "Wait until landing. I want them to face it directly." He wanted them to feel the weight of consequences, not through a cold email, but through a real look, one that left no room for denial. In the cockpit, Briggs and Evan whispered over the radio. Andre picked up fragments. "Disruptive passenger. Don't let it delay the schedule. People like that cause issues." People like that, a phrase that twisted his stomach for a moment, not from hurt, but because it confirmed what he had known all along. Skyline did not just have management issues, it was rotten from the root. In the cabin, Richard was telling a story about a business deal where he once forced the other side to bow words, dripping with arrogance, the look in his eyes, spreading disdain across first class. His laughter bounced off the cabin walls and echoed back like a rhythm of self-importance. Andre looked at him from behind a calm, almost chilling gaze. No anger, no bitterness, only the look of someone observing a crumbling painting and deciding to shatter it, not out of revenge, but because it no longer deserved to exist. On his screen, another notification appeared. Press release ready. Awaiting your approval. The headline read, Coleman Dynamics officially acquires Skyline Executive Jets. Beneath it, the statement continued, complete overhaul of service culture, prioritizing respect and customer experience. Andre finished reading, exhaling slowly. Not out of pride, but because he understood the impact it would cause. Not just for Skyline, but also for Richard Hale, the man mocking him only a few seats ahead. As the jet glided deeper into the night sky, Andre let his mind drift back to the earliest days of his career, the nights he slept on the office floor, the rejected funding pitches because the team lacks credibility, the meetings where he had to fight for his voice to be heard. All of it had led to this moment, the moment he chose not to respond to humiliation, with anger, but with ownership, with authority, with the power to change the entire game. Melissa stopped the cart beside his seat. Would you like anything to drink? The question carried a tone of bare minimum politeness, the kind everyone could recognize. Andre looked directly into her eyes. His smile was gentle, but his gaze was cold as steel. No, I'm fine. Melissa's heart skipped for a reason she could not explain. That gaze, calm and deep and icy, made her feel as if she were standing in front of a completely different person. She shook the feeling away, reassuring herself that it was nothing. She did not know that this was the lightest warning he would give her. Outside the window, the Pacific Ocean stretched into the horizon, the moonlight drawing a silver path across the surface. The jet pierced through the night sky like a silver arrow cutting darkness. And inside, in the fourth row, a storm of judgment was growing silent, but unstoppable. Andre closed his laptop and leaned back. He no longer thought about the insult. He thought about the moment the jet would land in Zurich, when he would stand up, when he would call them into the cockpit, when he would speak the truth. From this moment on, I am the one who decides your future. And at that very moment up front, Richard lifted his face and shivered slightly, as if a cold wind had brushed past him. He did not know the storm approaching, not a storm of the sky, but a storm of justice. And the name of that storm was Andre Coleman. The moment the landing gear of the Skyline G700 touched the Zurich runway, the cabin shook with a faint tremor. But to Andre Coleman, it was the opening bell of a new battleground, a place where every mask would be ripped away. The cabin lights flicked on the pilot's standard announcement, flowed through the speakers. Yet beneath that routine calm, Andre could feel the pulse of something awakening justice, reckoning the cold precision of a final strike, all rising together like a creature stretching after a long sleep. Melissa walked down the aisle with her trained, polished steps, still wearing the smile she believed was flawless. We have landed. Please keep your seatbelts fastened, she said. She glanced at Andre, and for one brief flicker, his eyes froze her smile mid-air. But she continued on, convinced he was just an unpleasant passenger, a small inconvenience already resolved. If she knew what was coming, she wouldn't have looked away. Andre unfastened his belt and rose, not rushing, yet carrying an energy so dense that the air around him seemed to solidify. Richard Hale was still folding his magazine, his expression full of pride, after a flight he believed had restored order. He winked at Melissa and said loud enough for the cabin to hear, "That's how a flight should be. No troublemakers in the front seats." Andre walked past him without giving him even half a glance. And that disregard hit Richard harder than any insult. It was as if someone had switched off the spotlight he believed belonged to him. Only one person understood what Richard was truly feeling in that moment, and that was Andre. The feeling of a man standing on a mountain peak, completely unaware that the ground beneath him had already shattered. Andre moved toward the front. Melissa's unease finally surfaced. "So the exit is this way," she said, her voice shrinking as if her vocal cords instinctively tightened in the presence of his rising authority. Andre did not stop. "I need to see the pilots." His voice wasn't loud, but it struck harder than metal. Melissa opened her mouth to object, but the look in his eyes froze her in place as if she had been dragged to the bottom of the ocean. That was not the gaze of a passenger. That was the gaze of someone who held power. Andre knocked lightly on the cockpit door. Briggs opened it with his usual impatience. "So this area is restricted. You need... sit down." 2 words. Simple. But they hit Briggs like a spear. He froze, a chill cutting down his spine for reasons he couldn't explain. "I said this area is sit. Down." Andre's voice dropped to a temperature that made Evan, who was removing his headset, feel as if the cockpit had lost 10 degrees of heat. By pure reflex, the reflex of someone who had spent a lifetime obeying superiors, Briggs sank into the co-pilot's seat. Evan looked at Melissa for help, but her face was pale with fear and confusion. Andre stepped inside and closed the door. The tiny cockpit instantly transformed into a courtroom, and he was the judge, the jury, and the executioner. "Do you know who owns Skyline Executive Jets right now?" He asked, his words sharp, like the pull of a grenade pin. Briggs gave a dismissive laugh. "Who do you think you're threatening?" Dre turned his tablet toward them. The screen glowed with the purchase contract, the law firm's red seal, the digital signatures, and a blazing headline, "Coleman Dynamics has completed the acquisition of Skyline Executive Jets." Briggs went pale first. Evan's face drained of color. Melissa put a hand over her mouth, nearly dropping her tray. Andre continued, each word falling like a hammer. "From the moment we were still in the air, you were already my employees." Briggs stammered. You're joking, I do not joke." The stillness in Andre's voice was more terrifying than any shout. "I never joke about discrimination." Melissa's hands trembled visibly. Every moment she had belittled him, every attempt to force him out of his seat, every whispered comment from Richard, all of it crashed over her like a wave of ice. Evan tried to speak. "We were just following regulations." Which regulation? Andre cut him off. "The one that allows you to mistreat black passengers, the one that lets you move a paying customer because a loyal client felt uncomfortable, or the one that lets a pilot threaten to remove someone from the plane just to please a bigot." Melissa broke into tears. Briggs's face flushed with shame and anger. Evan stared at the floor, unable to breathe. Andre looked at each of them, his eyes carrying no hatred, no spite, only a weight of disappointment heavy enough to crush steel. I've lived my entire life through moments like this. Everywhere I go, I have to prove I deserve to be there. And today on a plane, I paid to sit on. You tried to push me out of my own seat because of a whisper from a familiar customer. He paused. His voice softened, but the quiet carried the force of thunder. "You didn't just insult me. You reminded me of the hundreds of times I was treated as if I didn't deserve the space I walked into." Briggs tried to collect himself. "Mr. Coleman, we silence." One word. Enough to swallow the entire cockpit. Then Andre opened the personnel file he had prepared. Effective immediately, all 3 of you are suspended. The reasons: discriminatory conduct, abuse of authority, and severe violation of professional ethics. Melissa collapsed into a seat, shaking as if she had lost everything because she had. Evan lifted his head, pale as paper. "Sir, I only—" "You stayed silent," Andre replied without hesitation. "And silence in the face of injustice is also a crime." Briggs leaned forward, eyes burning with a mix of rage and panic. "You're destroying 3 careers over a seat." Andre stared straight into him, the answer falling cold as ice. "No. I am destroying a culture so rotten it treats humiliation as normal." Then he adjusted his collar and exhaled as if the battle were already over. "Security will escort you out. Pack your things. The future of Skyline, or rather Coleman Air, has no place for the values you displayed today." At that moment, the cockpit door opened. Richard Hale poked his head in, ready to throw out another smug comment. But when he saw Andre's eyes, and the 3 ashen faces of Briggs, Evan, and Melissa, the smile on his lips froze like glass. He didn't know what had happened, but he understood the only thing that mattered: the balance of power had flipped completely. And for the first time during the entire flight, Richard Hale was the one who felt uncomfortable. Andre stepped out of the cockpit, leaving the 3 behind in the storm they had created. But they didn't know a second storm, a storm meant specifically for Richard Hale, was already forming closer than ever, and it would drag his entire world into an inescapable vortex. The moment Andre Coleman stepped out of the cockpit, carrying not a trace of anger in his posture, the cabin thickened as if the very air had been squeezed tight. The cockpit door closed behind him, sealing in 3 trembling people trapped inside the nightmare they had created for themselves. Andre did not look back. By then, they were no longer the problem that mattered. The real problem was sitting in the front row, still wearing an expression that mixed pride with confusion as he watched Andre emerge from the cockpit like a man delivering a death sentence. Richard Hale slowly put down his phone, but the ease in his eyes was gone. In Richard's world, people from lower ranks never stepped into the pilot's domain, let alone walked out of it with the calm authority of someone who controlled life and fate. A hint of unease seeped it into him, cell by cell, but the arrogance that had rotted him over the years forced him to hide it under a weak laugh. "Oh, everything okay up there?" Richard asked, forcing a casual tone, as if Andre had gone in to ask about turbulence. Andre didn't answer. He walked past without a glance, without a breath of acknowledgement, moving as if there was no one in that cabin worthy of being addressed. That silence rattled Richard even more than if Andre had shouted at him. Melissa stood near the door, face-drained eyes red, but terrified to make a sound. Evan kept his head, bowed fingers trembling. Briggs no longer had the dominating confidence he displayed in the air, staring down at his own hands, as if they no longer belonged to him. When Andre stepped out onto the jet stairway, the cold Zurich morning wind struck his face clean and sharp like a blade. It honed every emotion in him. But it was not satisfaction, not vengeance. It was the calm of someone who knew justice had finally aligned itself with him. The security team from the European division of Coleman Dynamics waited at the bottom of the stairs. Their leader, a tall woman named Harper, bowed. "Welcome to Zurich, Mr. Coleman. Everything is ready." Andre gave a slight nod. "Escort the flight crew to the hotel. Keep them under supervision until the HR team arrives." "Understood," Harper said. No further explanation needed. Andre pulled his suitcase, lightly, the wheels rolling across the airport tiles like the ticking of a clock marking each step of the operation he had set in motion. And that operation didn't end with 3 irresponsible employees. Richard Hale was still standing in the spotlight, though he didn't yet know whether it was the glow of a stage or the heat of a furnace. On the way to the transport car, Andre checked his phone. A stream of messages from Daniel appeared. Finance division has taken control. Skyline's former chief executive officer has submitted his resignation. Press release scheduled for 60 minutes. Skyline's board is holding an emergency meeting. Andre read them all, then typed, "Good. Send me the full VIP client files." Daniel replied immediately, "You want to review Richard Hale first." Andre stopped walking. His polished leather shoes held firm on the pavement like a column anchored into the earth, unmoved even as wind swept through. Send. One word. But Daniel knew that one word signaled the start of the next battle. The file arrived within seconds. Andre opened it. Everything was there. Richard's company holdings, his partner's financial structure, loan records, dependency on transportation networks, and notes from the legal team. Evidence of suspicious financial redirection, potential misuse of subsidy funds, 2 companies operating below safe financial thresholds. Andre inhaled deeply, feeling his resolve harden like metal. He didn't need a pretext. He only needed the truth. And the truth was that Richard Hale had built his financial empire by crushing smaller companies and leaving them to collapse. A man like that hadn't just insulted Andre on a flight. He had trampled hundreds of others throughout his career. No, Andre thought. This is not revenge. This is the scale of justice returning to its rightful place. A black limousine rolled up in front of him, and the door opened automatically. He stepped into the back seat, setting his tablet on his lap. When the door closed, the world inside the car became a quiet cocoon where he could dissect his plan. He reopened Richard's file, scanning each page as though he had studied it for years. He imagined Richard sitting in some lavish restaurant, confidently signing a new deal, completely unaware that the anchors holding his empire steady were being loosened one by one. As the car merged onto the highway toward central Zurich, Andre started a video call with Daniel. His loyal partner's face appeared on the screen. Daniel, activate deep analysis on Hale and Branson Capital. Already running. The AI is processing 10 years' worth of data. Filter for all vulnerabilities tied to his transport dependencies. Daniel nodded. If we acquire his primary logistics provider, he won't be able to operate. Andre smiled faintly. Not the smile of malice, the smile of a man who had just spotted the weak point in an indestructible fortress. Proceed. When the car reached the hotel entrance, Andre did not step out immediately. He looked up at the sky through the glass, a sky so calm it was hard to believe that only hours ago he had been forced from his seat because of his skin. But what strengthened him was not the humiliation. It was the ability to turn that humiliation into the starting point of structural change. Not for himself, but for a system that had been rotting for years. He exited the car and crossed the marble hotel lobby, indifferent to the decor or the respectful bowing of the staff. His mind was elsewhere. He was imagining the moment Richard Hale would receive the first call informing him that his transport contract had been suspended. He was imagining the next day, when media outlets would broadcast the news that Skyline Executive Jets had been acquired and its service model was being completely rebuilt. He was imagining Briggs Evan Melissa and dozens of other Skyline employees realizing this was not a minor disciplinary action. This was major surgery. When Andre reached his room, he paused before the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the city. Zurich was peaceful, orderly, beautiful, a stark contrast to the storm he had unleashed and was about to intensify. But all of it was necessary, not because he wanted revenge, but because if he didn't do it, no one would. "They think they won," he whispered, "but they don't know they've awakened a monster. Not a monster of hatred, a monster made of truth. And tomorrow, that monster would hunt." The morning in Zurich began with a thin veil of mist over the lake and the first rays of sunlight slipping through the hotel window. But to Andre Coleman, this was not a morning to admire the tranquil beauty of Switzerland. It was the moment when the gears of a massive machine, a machine of power he had just set in motion, began to spin at a speed that could crush anyone standing in the wrong place. As Andre stepped into the lobby of the Conrad Hotel, his phone vibrated non-stop. Daniel had sent a stream of messages. Hale still doesn't know, but his partners are already reacting to the transport chain being suspended. The next one, media outlets have received the press release, expected to go public within 1 hour. And then Skyline's former CEO has officially left headquarters. The board is in panic. Andre slipped the phone back into his jacket pocket, his face calm and unreadable. He was used to moments like this, moments when he delivered a silent strike whose aftershocks were forceful enough to shake an entire system. When he stepped into the black sedan, headed to the Swiss partner's office, he took a call from Eleanor Vance, chief legal counsel of Coleman Dynamics, a woman whose sharp mind could spot flaws in a contract with a single glance. Andre Eleanor began bluntly. "I reviewed the entire Hale and Branson capital file. What our AI found isn't just irregularities. It's a network of corruption and financial manipulation." Andre looked out the car window, the morning light reflecting in his eyes, revealing his intense focus. "Go on." "There is clear evidence that Richard used subsidized funds from 2 acquisitions to cover personal losses. That is a federal criminal offense, if proven." Andre said nothing for several seconds. Eleanor knew that silence. It wasn't hesitation. It was the silence of an architect mapping out the collapse of a tower its owner believed was indestructible. "Keep digging," Andre said. "Push the AI through every transaction." "Already done," Eleanor replied. "I will have a full report by this afternoon." The car stopped in front of the glass headquarters of Zurich Robotics Group, but Andre did not enter immediately. He opened Daniel's newest message. "Midwest Freight Solutions has accepted the buyout offer. They will sell 85% of their shares. We now control Hale's primary supply chain." Andre closed his eyes for a brief moment. Not out of triumph, but because the final piece had just locked perfectly into place, restoring balance to a system that had long been broken. "Complete it," he replied. "Immediately." The meeting with Zurich Robotics went flawlessly. Andre spoke little but with decisive clarity, his deep voice so composed that the partner not only agreed to the terms, but also pledged long-term collaboration. When he exited the conference room, Daniel called again, his voice tight. "Andre, this is beginning to spread." "The news?" Andre asked. "No. Hale's major clients are calling, demanding to know why transport is frozen." Andre walked down a long corridor, lined with red carpet. "Have they been told the reason?" "Not yet," Daniel said. "But they know something serious is happening. And more importantly, Richard is calling non-stop. He wants to speak with you directly." Andre stopped mid-hallway. The white ceiling lights reflected off his face, making his expression as sharp as carved stone. "Do not answer," he said. "Let him wait." Daniel exhaled somewhere between pity and awe. "After this, his entire career will collapse. It's not collapsing because of me," Andre replied. "It's collapsing because of him." By the time Andre returned to the hotel, the press release had already erupted across global media. Coleman Dynamics acquires Skyline Executive Jets, announces complete overhaul of service standards. Social networks exploded. Tech outlets reposted it. Financial analysts rushed to comment. But the most significant moment came from an unknown number. "Mr. Andre Coleman," a voice asked. "This is a representative of the SEC. We would like to meet regarding the documents received this morning concerning Hale and Branson Capital." Andre stepped into the elevator, the doors closing like a silent punctuation mark, announcing Phase 2 of the storm. "I understand," he said. "Schedule it for tomorrow." The voice added, "You should know if these documents are legitimate. Mr. Hale is in serious trouble." Andre didn't respond. He didn't need to. Everything he wanted to communicate was already contained in his silence. As the elevator doors opened, Harper, the security chief, approached and handed him an envelope. "Richard Hale is heading to Zurich Airport. He booked an urgent flight back to the United States." Andre opened the envelope, reviewed the itinerary. "Prepare a Coleman Air jet to London. Tonight. I'll be flying in 2 hours." Harper nodded. "The new crew has been briefed. They have orders for absolute priority service." Andre entered his suite and walked toward the window. He looked down at the city with the eyes of a man, not just changing a system, but rewriting the logic of those who believed power was something they were born entitled to. No, power was something built, earned, protected, and used to create justice. Then his phone vibrated again. This time the screen showed 2 words. Richard Hale Andre let it ring. Once, twice, 3 times. Only on the 4th ring did he answer, not because Richard deserved a response, but because Andre was now ready to end the opening act of the storm. Andre Richard barked, struggling to control his voice and failing miserably. "What the hell is happening? My logistics are frozen. What is your company doing?" Andre sank into the leather sofa, leaning back, his voice steady enough to chill the air. "I'm not doing anything, Richard. Everything happening is simply the result of the choices you made." "What do you want?" Andre closed his eyes. He wanted nothing. Not victory. Not humiliation. Not revenge. There was only one thing, something Richard had never understood. "I want justice," Andre said. "And justice is coming for everyone who thinks they have the right to stand above others." On the other end, Richard exhaled shakily, unable to speak. In that moment, Andre knew he had pulled down the final veil covering a collapsing empire, and this pursuit of justice had reached the point of no return. The moment the afternoon light in Zurich shifted from gold to a cold silver, Andre Coleman walked out of the conference room with his usual calm. But outside, above the surface of the lake, only he understood that a domino chain had begun to fall, each collapsing piece, dragging down the life of someone who once believed they could trample others without consequence. Meanwhile, nearly half a world away in Chicago, inside the 42nd floor office of Hale and Branson, Capital Richard Hale tore off his tie, his face flushed with a cocktail of anger and panic. His entire life had been built on being flattered, being served, watching others bow their heads. But today, his assistant delivered a thunderbolt. "Midwest Freight Solutions, they terminated our contract. All transport routes are suspended for 30 days. Richard shot up from his chair. "Impossible, we're their largest client," the assistant stammered. "Sir Midwest Freight changed ownership. The new company belongs to Coleman Dynamics." 1 second of silence, then another. Then Richard felt his stomach drop, as if the entire world had tilted beneath him. No, that's impossible. But truth is truth. And it made itself clearer when his office phone rang, nearly making him jump. On the other end was the head of his primary bank, a man Richard had known for 15 years, but whose voice today was cold as steel. "We've reviewed your debt agreements. The loss of your transport chain is a serious breach of operational assurances. We will begin recalling your credit." Richard nearly screamed. "What the hell are you talking about? I'm your biggest client, and now you are the biggest risk," the man replied without emotion. "I'm sorry, Richard." The line cut. Richard stood frozen. He knew exactly what that meant. No transport, no credit, no liquidity, no way to sustain any of his ongoing deals. A company like Hale and Branson doesn't fall from a massive storm. It collapses because one stone is pulled from the foundation. And that stone was Andre Coleman. In Zurich, Andre sat in his hotel suite as Daniel delivered updates via video call. "Richard has lost 40% of his liquid assets in the past 6 hours, Daniel said, with a voice torn between awe and disbelief. "Partners are abandoning him. Some are considering lawsuits because their projects are collapsing without the supply chain." Andre stared at the screen, his eyes carrying no joy and no malice, only the clarity of witnessing justice operate with precision. "Continue," he said. Daniel tapped a key. Emails filled the screen, internal notes from companies Richard had acquired, then neglected lists of employees laid off without compensation, unfinished legal documents, and a full report from the AI system mapping out financial manipulation. All of this, Daniel said, is being picked apart by the media. It only needs one spark. Andre replied softly. "And we already provided the spark." Only minutes later, the real explosion happened not in Andre's room, but across major newsrooms. Eleanor sent a short message the Wall Street Journal just published the first piece. Andre opened the link. The headline hit like a bell of condemnation: "The dark side of Hale and Branson corporate ruins and the secrets of dirty money." The article spread like wildfire. Other outlets jumped in instantly. CNBC, Bloomberg, the New York Times, all digging into the investigative documents Andre's legal team had provided. They reported on the companies Richard had driven into bankruptcy, on workers who lost their pensions, on suspicious loans. And when the media released the second, third, and fourth waves, Richard Hale stopped being a financial titan. He became the symbol of ruthless greed. In Chicago, the front of Hale and Branson's building filled with reporters. Cameras pointed at the entrance. The company spokesperson tried to push them back, but it was futile. When Richard stepped outside, flashes erupted like thunder. "Mr. Hale, did you use pension funds to hide losses? Mr. Hale, did you abuse your power to bankrupt small companies and liquidate their assets? Mr. Hale, do you have a response to financial fraud allegations?" Richard covered his face and backed away, but the crowd pressed in. He had once been the man others avoided. Now he was the one avoiding a society he had long looked down on. The emergency board meeting took place that same night. Richard entered the room, believing he could take control, as he always had. But not this time. Every other board member stared at him with cold accusation. No respect, no fear, only disgust. The chairman said with icy precision, "We have voted to suspend you as CEO effective immediately." "You ungrateful cowards," Richard shouted. But his voice no longer sounded powerful, only like the desperate noise of a drowning man reaching for a branch that wasn't there. No one answered him. Security escorted him out. As he walked through the hallway, Richard felt the entire building collapse inward, squeezing him into a corner with no exit. His hands trembled not from the cold, but from the realization that for the first time in his life, he had no power left. Meanwhile, in Zurich, Andre received a call from the SEC. "We are opening a formal investigation," the agent said. "Criminal charges are highly possible." Andre responded simply, "I understand," and ended the call. No smile, no sigh, because Andre knew true justice does not need applause. It only needs to be carried out. When Richard finally sat alone in the dark corner of his former office, watching news segments showing him under investigation, disgraced, treated like a criminal, he gripped his phone so tightly his knuckles turned white. He called Andre. Once. Twice. 3 times. On the 10th call, Andre finally answered, not because Richard deserved it, but because Andre was ready to close the opening chapter of the storm. "Andre, you have to help me." Richard's voice cracked like shattered glass. Andre stared at the Zurich skyline, glowing in warm amber light. "Richard," he said slowly, "you once told me I didn't belong in seat 1A. Richard went silent. Andre continued, each word driving in like a nail. "You are partly right. I don't just deserve to sit there. I deserve to own the plane." A sharp, panicked breath echoed through the phone. Andre delivered the final sentence, calm, yet carrying the weight of a verdict, "And you no longer deserve to own your own career." He hung up. That was the moment the last crown on Richard's head fell. The collapse was complete, but Andre's pursuit of justice was far from over, because ahead lay an entire rotten system that needed to be rebuilt from its foundation. Richard Hale did not collapse with a single catastrophic explosion, but with countless tiny fractures spreading like spiderweb cracks across tempered glass, each one widening until the entire sheet shattered from nothing more than a light touch. But Andre Coleman understood one thing with absolute clarity. Justice could not end with knocking one man off the throne of his own arrogance. To heal a rotting system, he needed to do far more. He needed to rebuild the foundation of Skyline executive jets, now absorbed into Coleman Dynamics, and raise it to a new standard. In his Zurich hotel suite, the soft light reflected across Andre's composed features as he sat alone, surrounded by reports, personnel files, and restructuring plans his team had worked through the night to prepare. All of them waited for his signature. Daniel sent a message. "Corporate Culture Division is ready. Just give the green light." Andre rested his hand on the table. He refused to simply fire a few employees and allow the system to continue as it always had. Melissa Briggs and Evan were not the root of the problem. They were symptoms of a culture that valued the money of long-time clients over the dignity of human beings. They were small pieces of a far larger picture that had decayed from within. And to create real change, Andre had to replace the entire picture. He typed back to Daniel, "Begin a full-scale evaluation. Management is not exempt." Daniel replied almost immediately, "You're sure there will be backlash?" Andre looked out at the night-lit Zurich skyline, a city glowing with discipline and order. "I'm not looking for comfort," he wrote. "I'm looking for change." Meanwhile, in New Jersey, the old headquarters of Skyline chaos was unfolding like an earthquake. The former executive board was forced to turn in all documents. Access badges were deactivated. Mid-level employees wandered in fear and confusion. No one knew exactly what was happening, only that the BlackCeo they had once looked down on now sat at the top of the company with full authority over every life inside that building. But Andre had no intention of seeking revenge. He intended to test them, to see who would stand for justice and who would fight to protect the injustice they had grown comfortable with. 2 days later, when Andre returned to the United States, he called for the first and most important meeting at the main building of Skyline, now renamed Coleman Air. The lobby was packed. Whispered conversations ricocheted across the hall. Some were anxious, some curious, some terrified. No one knew what awaited them. But the moment Andre stepped in, silence washed through the room like a wave. Not because he shouted, not because he flaunted authority, but because they were staring at the man who single-handedly dismantled Hale and Branson Capital in a matter of days. Andre stood on the small stage at the front, gentle lights shining across his simple yet immaculate suit. He looked at the faces before him, people who had once seen him as nothing more than a customer, a passenger, someone they could dismiss without hesitation. Today he was their owner, but he did not use power to intimidate. He used it to reveal the truth. "I am not here to fire all of you." Andre began, his voice low but sharp enough that every word dropped like heavy water onto a still lake. "I am here to give you a chance to stand on the right side." A ripple of murmurs moved through the room, as if they had heard something foreign and difficult to believe. "What happened on my flight," Andre continued, "was not an isolated incident. It was the shadow of a culture you have allowed to grow unchecked." His gaze swept across the crowd. "A culture that sees customers not as human beings, but as categories. A culture that treats respect as a privilege reserved for a select few instead of a basic right for everyone." No one dared to breathe loudly. Andre spoke on steady and unwavering. "I have sat in the back. I have been asked to move seats, been dismissed, been underestimated. And I have watched that happen to countless customers who had even less of a voice than I do." He paused. "And I swear this in the world I lead that will never happen again." Someone in the front row lowered their head. Another wiped away a tear. These were not just statements. They were mirrors held up to every conscience in the room. Andre activated the screen behind him. Projected on it were the words, "Coleman Air Respect" in every seat. This was not a marketing slogan. It was a commitment. "We will rebuild the entire training system," Andre said. "There will be a new academy, new standards, and new people." A small voice from the back asked, "What about those of us who are already here?" Andre met that voice with softened eyes, though his tone remained firm. "Those willing to change will have a place in the future of Coleman Air. Those who are not will not." The person nodded slowly, understanding the core of the matter. The meeting ended with applause, not applause for Andre, but applause for something many had never imagined an airline could embody dignity. In the week that followed, Andre dedicated himself to rebuilding the company. He met every department, pilots, technicians, cabin crews, maintenance teams. He listened to buried stories, to injustices hidden beneath years of fear. Some employees had been discriminated against because of their skin or gender. Some passengers had been mistreated because they weren't part of the elite client list. And in each story, Andre recognized a piece of his former self. He paid particular attention to a young flight attendant who had witnessed the entire incident, but stayed silent because she feared losing her job. When Andre asked why she didn't speak up, she broke down in tears. "I'm only a new hire. I didn't think anyone would believe me." Andre placed a hand on her shoulder. A real company, he said, never punishes those who speak up. And from today on, you will never have to be afraid again. He placed her in the new leadership training program. She became one of the strongest advocates in rebuilding the company's culture. But while Andre was healing the inside, the storm aimed at Richard Hale had not yet reached its peak, when the media released yet another report, a report proving Richard had manipulated pension funds for hundreds of workers. Public outrage erupted. Former employees stepped forward to testify. Small towns whose factories had been bought and shut down by Richard appeared on the evening news with voices trembling. The story was no longer about finance. It was about morality, humanity, justice. When news of this reached Andre, he stood silently by the window, staring at the wide sky. It wasn't me who destroyed him, he thought. It was the truth. And that was what set Andre apart from every person who had ever challenged Richard. He did not fuel his mission with hatred. He fueled it with truth. Truth and the belief that justice could begin with a single seat on an airplane. But the final chapter of Richard Hale's downfall was still ahead of him, an ending even Richard himself could not yet imagine. Below is the full English translation of your passage, following every requirement, smooth voice over style. No line breaks, no added or removed details, all numbers converted to words for narration and absolutely natural flowing storytelling. As the media storm continued to tear apart Richard Hale's career in another corner of the country, Andre Coleman was beginning to rebuild from the fragments of a company that had once been proud but was rotting from within. To Andre Skyline, executive jets, now renamed Coleman Air, was not merely an investment or a corporate acquisition. It was a symbol, a piece representing every place in society that had once made him feel like he did not belong, and now that he truly owned it, he was determined to turn it into a symbol of fairness, standard and dignity placed above everything else. The headquarters of Coleman Air launched 3 straight days of company-wide meetings. Andre did not just sit at the podium. He moved from table to table, group to group, listening to the small voices that had long been buried. He heard the story of an Asian woman who had been demeaned by passengers who assumed she was not qualified to be a flight attendant for a premium aviation service. He heard a technician say he once wanted to report the abuse of power by a chief pilot, but was threatened with losing his job. He heard the quiet, trembling, fragile voices that the old system had never bothered to hear. Andre never interrupted. He let them speak until the end eyes, steady ears, fully listening. Each story was a needle piercing the skin of the old system, revealing that the problem was never a few individuals. It was a foundation corroded long ago. After 3 days, he gathered the new leadership team, people chosen for their competence, integrity, and courage. We cannot call ourselves Coleman Air if we continue living with Skyline's values, Andre said, his voice low but firm. Starting today, every act of disrespect will be removed. Every position will be re-evaluated, and every employee from pilot to flight attendant will undergo retraining. A vice president asked, "How long will the program last?" Andre looked down at the document, then raised his eyes with unwavering resolve. "As long as it takes. This is not a course. This is a rebirth." He announced the establishment of the Coleman Air Academy, a new training institute tasked with rebuilding the entire philosophy of service ethics, customer psychology, behavior, culture, and bias prevention. The instructors would not only be aviation experts, but social psychologists, professors of unconscious bias, cultural conflict, specialists, and professional ethics consultants. No one believed a private airline could build an academy like this. But Andre did it. And even more surprising was his requirement that all pilots, even those with decades of experience, attend the course Power and Responsibility in the Sky. It was the first time in the industry that a CEO questioned the ethical framework of pilots instead of assessing only technical skill. Some protested, calling it insulting. Andre answered with a sentence that silenced the entire room. A pilot does not only control the aircraft, they control the safety and dignity of their passengers. If they do not understand that they do not deserve the cockpit. While Coleman Air entered its reconstruction, Andre noticed a familiar face, the young flight attendant, who had trembled on that flight, who witnessed the entire incident and nearly lost her job for wanting to stand on the side of truth, but being too afraid to speak. Andre called her into his office. "I heard your story," he said, gentle but serious, "and I want to ask you one question." She stood straight as if preparing for a final judgment. Andre asked, "If that day happened again, would you speak up?" The young woman took a deep breath, eyes slightly red, but no longer hiding. "Yes, because now I know I will be heard." Andre smiled. "Good. I want you to become a training assistant for the academy." She broke into tears, not from fear, but because, for the first time, someone acknowledged her real worth. As the company transformed, Andre realized something. Not everyone resisted change. Many employees, especially the younger ones, stood firmly behind him, seeing him as the one who liberated them from an oppressive system. They sent thank-you emails saying they felt proud to wear the uniform for the first time. Even some veteran pilots admitted, "I've never been trained in this way." We should have had this long ago. Andre understood something profound. True change is not the destruction of what exists. True change is awakening the goodness still buried inside the system. But while Andre was rebuilding a new company, the storm aimed at Richard Hale continued to strike. The media didn't let him breathe. The SEC officially launched an investigation. Remaining shareholders sued him for fraud. 3 satellite companies he controlled declared cascading bankruptcy. And then came the climax, the federal hearing, where Richard was charged with embezzling pension funds from hundreds of workers. The scandal was so explosive, it opened the national evening news. When the broadcast ended, Daniel called Andre. "Did you see it?" Andre stood by the window, the city lights reflecting across his face. "I saw it." "And how do you feel?" "I feel," Andre said slowly, "that a man has finally met the truth he spent his entire life avoiding." Daniel fell silent. Andre looked down at the glowing avenue below. Richard did not fall because of me, Daniel. He fell because no one can hide darkness forever. Then he turned toward the reconstruction plan for Coleman Air, pinned on the wall. "And as for us," he said, "we are walking toward the light." In that moment, Andre understood that his battle was no longer just about reclaiming justice for himself. He was building something far greater, an empire built on human dignity, not privilege. An empire where anyone, no matter who they are, where they come from, or what color their skin is, deserves to be treated with equal respect. An empire he wished had existed when he was young. And for the first time in months, Andre exhaled softly, as if some old wounded part of him, hurt on airplanes and boardrooms in moments when he was overlooked, had finally begun to heal. But the journey was not over, because one final chapter of justice still waited ahead. Below is the full English translation, written in a smooth, continuous voice over ready style with no line breaks, no added or removed details, and all numbers converted into words for narration. 6 months after the first storm began, as Tokyo's sky softened into a gentle golden dawn, the brand-new Coleman Air G650 slid along Haneda's runway like a silver arrow preparing to pierce the highest layer of clouds. Andre Coleman sat in seat 1A, the seat he had once been forced to leave, the seat that had sparked a chain of events shaking the foundations of American finance. But today seat 1A was no longer a symbol of discrimination or exclusive power. It was a symbol of rebuilding, of change, of justice, finally placed in the hands of the right person. Beside him, the new chief flight attendant, Sarah Jensen, stood tall with the poised professionalism of someone who understood the responsibility she carried. "Mr. Coleman, we have completed all procedures. The aircraft is ready for departure whenever you wish." Andre nodded and accepted the glass of water she offered. There was no excessive bowing, no flattery, no reluctant smile like in the past. Only respect, the very thing he had spent his entire life fighting for. When the cabin settled, Andre opened his tablet, and before beginning his work, a news alert flashed across the screen. Richard Hale sentenced to 10 years for fraud and pension fund abuse. The headline did not bring Andre joy, nor did it bring regret. It simply made his breath pause for a moment, as if a chapter had finally been sealed with a legal stamp. He remembered their last phone call. He remembered the shattered voice of a man once so arrogant he viewed others as dust beneath his feet. Andre had once thought he would feel satisfaction when Richard faced consequences, but as he read the news, he felt only a deeper truth. Sometimes the greatest downfall is the one a man builds inside himself, and Richard had dug his own grave long before Andre ever arrived. Justice was merely the final push that sent the stone over the edge. Andre set the tablet down and leaned back in his seat. Outside the window, Tokyo's sky unfolded like a robe of light. Sarah approached gently. "Would you like to review the graduation report for the first academy class?" Andre accepted the file, and a rare smile rose to his face. The young faces inside the report, the black pilots, the female technicians, the flight attendants from every culture, had all completed the training program. He created a program dismissed months earlier as a waste of time. Naive idealism, an unrealistic way to run an airline. But they had proven that respect was not an ideal. It was the foundation of a sustainable system. Andre turned to the final page and paused at the picture of the young flight attendant who once trembled during that fateful flight. Today she stood as part of the instructor team at Coleman Air Academy, her eyes filled with the confidence of someone who had faced injustice and chosen to stand on the right side. Andre whispered, "We did the right thing." Sarah heard him and smiled softly. "Not just the right thing, sir. We are setting a new standard for the entire industry." As the aircraft accelerated down the runway, the engines roared with the heartbeat of something reborn. Andre looked out the window. "Sarah," he said, "make sure no one passenger or employee ever feels like an outsider on a flight they belong to." Sarah placed a hand over her heart. "I promise." When the jet lifted off the ground, Andre felt something he had not felt in a long time: peace. Not the peace of someone who had completed revenge, but the peace of someone who had corrected something that should have been right from the beginning. At that moment, Daniel called. Andre, the Aviation Council, is considering adopting Coleman Air's standards into the industry-wide code of conduct. Andre closed his eyes and smiled. "Good. It is time." When he opened them, the deep blue sky stretched ahead like a boundless road. He understood then that his story was never just about a seat on an airplane. It was a story about dignity, about the right to be respected, about a man who was pushed out of his rightful place but did not fall. He rose, bought the plane, bought the company, and rebuilt a world that would be fairer for everyone who came after him. And as the sky widened beneath the wings of the Coleman Air G650, Andre knew he was flying not just to Tokyo. He was flying into a new era, an era where justice did not appear only when someone was wronged, but existed from the moment the cabin door opened, following every flight that brought the world closer to fairness. The sky was no longer a place for those who were allowed to sit in the front. It was a place where everyone deserved equal respect. Andre gazed outward and smiled softly. This sky at last belonged to him. And to everyone, from the perspective of an expert in organizational culture and system governance, Andre Coleman's story is far more than a personal journey of rising above prejudice. It is a clear demonstration of a truth many companies are only beginning to understand. Injustice doesn't erupt in one dramatic moment. It leaks in, quietly seeping through every small decision, every dismissive remark, every biased action. When an organization fails to build a foundation of respect, it begins to decay from within. And it takes only one individual with enough intelligence capability and resolve to stand up for the entire structure of that decay to be exposed. What makes this story profound is the way Andre chose to respond to humiliation. He did not choose anger, chaos, or impulsive reaction. He chose strategy. And that mindset transformed him from a victim into the person who rebuilt an entire industry. This is not just a lesson in power, it is a lesson in ethics, responsibility, and dignity values that, when placed correctly, create change far more enduring than any punishment ever could. If you believe in the importance of respect, justice, and leaders who dare to do what is right, tap like to help this story reach more people. Don't forget to subscribe so you can follow us on future journeys where each episode is a real lesson in the strength of the human spirit when confronted with injustice. And leave a comment with the phrase, "Enough justice," to let us know you stand with this movement toward positive change.